I'm Dr. Nathalie Beauchamp, and this is What the Heck, the podcast that dives into what the heck is going on in the world of health and well-being, explores how to optimize your mindset and your lifestyle, and shares practical tools so that you can achieve your fullest potential. Join me and a special guest each week as we discuss everything from biohacking to diet personalization to cutting-edge detox methods to setting and staying accountable to your goals. Ready to find out what the heck you can do to stay healthy, sharp, and at the top of your game? Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What the Heck podcast, where I interview guests on any different kind of topics. And I'm super excited today to interview Dr. Joe Clarino, who I saw speak in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, I guess a few weeks ago or a few months ago. And I was just so impressed with how he delivered his presentation, which was all about the thyroid. So welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm super glad to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome. So you have so much information. We're not going to fit it all in the presentation. And I remember your talk was short as well. And, you didn't even get through your slides. So let's, first of all, if you wouldn't mind, tell us your story, how you got to be a chiropractor and a functional medicine practitioner. What led you to do what you currently do?
Well, I also often believe that chiropractors are chosen. So I was definitely picked and plucked, if you will. I started going to chiropractor when I was 12 years old. My mother was having dizzy spells, passing out, went to tons of specialists. No one could help her. Of course, as a last resort, she went to the chiropractor and things happened. Well, I started going, playing sports. It was active. I remember sitting in his orientation class, listening to the message. And I remember it resonating with me, but not really knowing what he meant, Well, 4 years later, I met my wife, and it was her uncle. And so I am number 11 in the family. We have number 12 and 13 going to school right now. So it's a true legacy of a family of chiropractic. So I've been practicing 21 years, but about 10 years ago or so is when my whole perspective on practice and my own health completely made a shift. I think many doctors that are in the functional world came out of pain to purpose, if you will, in the sense of that they had no choice but to figure it out because now they were riddled by something that they weren't expecting. And I was exactly that person. I had no idea. I had no radar about going into anything functional or doing it like that. I could care less. I just wanted to adjust. And about 10 years ago, I hurt my shoulder. It wouldn't get well. I tried everything, rehabbing it, adjusting it, did everything. And about 6 weeks later, I got an MRI, and the MRI was negative. And I was thrown. I was like, how come my shoulder hurt this much? I can't work. I can't sleep, but yet nothing's wrong with it. So I went to a friend of mine. I said, hey man, would you give me a prolozone injection? Which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's an O3. It's a natural injection. It's ozone. And he's like, well, before we do that, tell me what's going on. And he started asking me a battery of questions. And he's like, man, you got a major thyroid problem. I was like, what? I'm like, I'm running 30 miles a week. I'm lifting 3 times a week. I'm in great shape. I do everything I'm supposed to do. There's no way I got a thyroid problem. He's like, you got a thyroid problem. And so after 10 minutes of sitting there arguing with him, he said, either do the test or get out. And I
Tough
was like,
love, right?
Yeah.
Tough love.
So I called my wife. I'm like, he's telling me I got to do it. She's like, what are you, an idiot? Just do it. She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So I did it. So it just goes to show even the doctors are resistant, right? It was just like this moment of resistance. And that's when everything changed. I found I had Hashimoto's. I had leaky gut. I was sensitive to gluten and a bunch of other things. My testosterone was 246. And my adrenals were flatlined. So needless to say, I was a walking train wreck. And my personality leads to the fact that if I don't know, I need to find out. So I started diving and digging and researching and following. And I stayed there in that clinic for a year, following them 3 times a week. And I started going online and just doing different programs and just started sucking up data as fast as I could. And then I started treating people. and I had a Magoo experience. I went back to my office, put on the Mr. Magoo glasses, and everything changed. Like I was like, oh my God, Mrs. Jones, you've been in this practice 9 years and you're a thyroid trainer. You know what I mean? I started seeing the things in a different light. And so the more I saw that, the more I wanted to know how I help these people. So I just kept diving in.
Awesome. You know, it is so common for a health practitioner. I was just talking to someone not too long ago. She was an engineer by training, got Lyme disease, became a naturopathic doctor to find solution for herself. So, and a common friend of ours uses that phrase, from pain to purpose. And I think it applies to a lot of people. So let's dive into thyroid issues, Joe, because I remember when you were talking in Toronto, I like that you put, was it 3 buckets that you, so let's talk about those buckets.
So, you know, just running literally hundreds, if not thousands of labs over the years, looking at different thyroid profiles, I found there was a common theme amongst my patients, looking at their questionnaire, looking at their lifestyle, and then getting these lab results back. I try to always glue, like, where's the red thread? Like, how is this coming into something? And as I kept doing that, it kind of hit me. I was like, wow, there's 3 major buckets that most people fall into. And I would probably say a good 95% of people can fall into these 3 buckets. And it was viral, GI, and adrenal. And now here's the crazy part. You could be 1 of the 3, 2 of the 3, or 3 of the 3, depending on the history and how long the problem's been there. And so, but inside of that, I was like, okay, well, is there a way to formulate that and have it a predictable outcome through an algorithm of questions and an algorithm of lab that I can kind of land them in a situation that I know I can reproduce over and over again. So I've been working on this thing for 3 years, trying to make this rhythm and algorithm, and it's been a ton of work and thousands of hours of programming. And I think we're at the point where we got it down pretty close. So we're really, really close to making this thing happen.
That's so exciting, because it's going to be so worth it in the end. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks. But I knew this too, that if I could build the infrastructure, well, then applying in like an adrenal problem or the viral problem and the GI issue, I can get analytical about those specifics deep inside that, so I can start making that happen more and more. So,
so it's you know, viral being the first one that you have on your list. Again, yesterday I'm here in Detroit. I have an event this afternoon, and I was talking with a functional medicine practitioner, and her area of work is into viruses and how they change DNA and how they impact the immune system. And I think, you know, am I right to say that adrenal and gut are often looked, especially by functional medicine practitioner, but would I be correct to say that viral is probably the one that is the least looked at, right?
Yeah, and what the analogy I have for people that have the viral component is that a lot of the viruses, like Epstein-Barr, we'll give one as an example, is one of the main ones. And Epstein-Barr, by age 2, 96% of people have Epstein-Barr. So it's not that it's common. The problem is that when the immune system's overworked and overused, it just cannot handle it. So right before I got sick, all of a sudden, poison ivy, I would get it all the time. I could eat the plant when I was a kid and never had a problem. And then all of a sudden, I started getting poison ivy all the time, and I couldn't understand why. And so then I was like, oh, because my immune system couldn't regulate it. It couldn't figure it out. Same thing is going on with these viruses. It's like if you were to stick your foot and hold the virus into a corner, and then you go on your life, you live your life, you do your thing, and everybody's okay. You know it's there. I'm doing my thing. Everybody's happy. But once it starts to get skewed, your foot comes off that process, and then it becomes aware of what it's doing, and then it creates havoc inside the immune system.
So there's lab that can test for that, and that's part of the protocol that you use, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we run your standard labs inside of thyroid, which should be like your T3, free T4, anti-TPOs, anti-globulins, and then your TSH. We've run that through that profile. And then inside of that, there's a predictable way of knowing where inside those lab values it's going to land more on a viral side, or more of a gut side, or more of an adrenal side. Again, sometimes there's an underlying issue of adrenal, an underlying issue of gut, And you could still address that, but we know the primary may be the viral, or the primary is the adrenal. And then inside the protocols, you're just able to try to help and support that back end of the patient.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that the viral bucket, if you want, has increased just because of, you know, us with our lifestyle and what we're doing that makes us more susceptible to that?
Yeah, and it's funny is I think you're 100%. I think between toxic load, I think about just daily stress, as even just from a cortisol response where the body's just constantly inundated with chronic stress. And now you have this inflammatory state, and then the cells ain't working right, and the viral wants to come out. And then you get exposed to something else. Or a great example is I've seen a lot of cases where literally one of the top questions I ask is, have you left the country? And you know, and like, when did all this start? They're like, oh, it started 6 years ago. I'm like, great. Did you leave the country year 7 or 8? They're like, no. I'm like, no, you think about it clear. And most of the time they're like, yeah, I did. I'm like, where'd you go? I went to some wherever. And I'm like, did you get sick? And they're like, yeah, but I was sick for like 4 days, 5 days. I'm like, no. Like, there was a pathogen that came in there that now caused a problem, that it became a stacked level of issues, and the immune system just physically couldn't take that. And now 6 years later, it showed its head, and that's where it comes from. So you got to start, you know, you got to reverse it. It's retracing, going back and figuring out where it came from, and then work yourself backwards. Reverse engineering. That's all it is.
Yeah, good. So let's move on to the other buckets.
Yes. GI, which was where I lived. I was in a GI issue, and so my gut was a mess. I was going to the bathroom every 4 to 5 days, stool, thinking it was normal, just like, you know, not paying attention. And what happened was, once I became aware of it, I realized that I was so bloated, so irritated all the time, always in, gas pains, to the point where sometimes I would keel over, like just that much pain. And if I was to give you a percentage of what walks in the door primarily, I would say 60% of the time it's GI driven. And then it can activate the viral, you know what I mean, from that side of it. But
mostly. Do you mind explaining a little bit more the connection between GI and thyroid? Because there's probably people listening to, you know, kind of understanding the generality of a healthy gut and immune system and so forth. But there is, you know, more than one connection. Such
a big connection there. Oh, God. So leaky gut, if those of you don't know what that is, the analogy I use for that is when you make coffee, you're taking, basically, you put a filter in there, you put coffee in the filter, and then when you get done, you have coffee water. You have colored water. You don't have granules in your water, you have coffee water. Well, the same thing happens in your gut. You're supposed to let certain nutrients and things into your bloodstream, and what happens is when that gut becomes irritated, inflamed, it allows granules to get into that bloodstream. Now you have coffee with granules, which no one likes coffee with granules. Well, the immune system doesn't either. And then it goes after it. And once it attacks it, it becomes a repetitive thing. So now you have this virus sitting here, you have this other pathogen sitting here, and then you have this gut thing happening where the body's attacking it. And the crazy thing for most people, gluten is the enemy, because gluten looks just like a thyroid molecule. And so when the immune system becomes overwhelmed, it gets confused and it starts attacking the thyroid gland instead of the gluten molecule. And then it turns into this whole snowball effect.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. So gut, and then the third bucket was adrenal, and God knows, you know, how stressed out people are with the 3 phases of adrenal fatigue. So in a nutshell, you know, it's cliche, right? Because we say, oh, I almost got in an accident, my adrenaline was pumping, you know, so adrenaline, cortisol, you know, all very important hormone, especially with the cortisol steal. And unfortunately, in our society, we're kind of rewarding that busyness and not so much slowing down and taking care of ourselves. And oftentimes, even with hormonal issues with estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, it's overlooked big time, right? To look at the adrenals first. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such a big deal. The adrenals, I think it's almost like the word stress. Like, it's like, I have 2-year-olds coming in the office going, I'm so stressed. Like, the word's so overdone. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like no one really understands the meaning because it's been watered down. When I think adrenals have kind of gotten that rap in the sense like, oh yeah, adrenals and cortisol, it's gotten beat up. And it's gotten almost in the sense of like numb to the fact that what it really does, like, and how effective it is. And then you got to remember, your adrenals and thyroid they're synergistic glands, as well as the sex hormones. They all play in the same sandbox. So when one goes off, everybody's stealing from Peter to give to Paul to try to balance this thing out. And it doesn't happen overnight. This is years of issues typically. And that's when people get into problems. But the chronic stress is the bombarder. And what we see a lot, it's not so much the adrenals not making cortisol. It becomes to the point that the cell no longer can hear it. It becomes like cortisol resistant or insulin resistance. A lot of people identify with that. And that's where you get that adrenal bomb, where it's hypoadrenalism, where you're just fatigued, tired, you can't get up, you're getting crashing all the time, your head, you can't think straight. These are the typical weight gain around the stomach. And these are typical things the adrenal people feel. And if you look around, we're inundated by it. I mean, society's rippled by it. And so that's something that's such a big thing.
Yeah, cellular inflammation is a huge thing, right, for the communication of hormones. And again, inflammation, I think the word inflammation is gaining, people are a little bit more knowledgeable about, but again, excuse me, not maybe understanding exactly what it means. So acute inflammation, you burn your hand on the oven, it's pretty acute, you take your hand off. Chronic is that slow, insidious process which will affect us at a cellular level. And if hormones can't get in the cell, then communication is not happening. So it's a huge component, which I'm sure, excuse me, you address.
Yeah, and inflammation, again, is becoming a cultural world, and I agree with you 1,000%. That cultural word, people are understanding it. But you're right, inflammation's getting, they're getting the connection in the sense of like, oh, I twisted my ankle's inflamed. And they don't understand the inflammation to a cell relative to an ankle, and that disconnect is there. And then they don't understand how the hormones have anything to do with that. And the analogy I have for that is like your receptors on your cell are like a lock, and the hormones are a key. And every one of those have a special lock for a special key. And without that, the cell can't do its job. It's just that simple. And when that lock gets rusted, or someone else parks themselves because they have a master key, we have a problem with the cell. And that's where that comes into play. So when people have an understanding of what inflammation is, it's really that rusting of the lock and not allowing that key to get into its job.
No, for sure. So we talked about the 3 buckets. So run us through, let's say, what do you do with a patient? You talked about the labs already. What are 3, excuse me, my goodness, let me drink a little bit of water here. The show is called the What the Heck. And my book being Hack Your Health Habits. I'm all about those quick little hacks that people can do to better their health. Now, I'm not saying that there's any quick fixes. I think we can both agree on this, but what are tips, tools, and strategies that you can point people to if they suspect they have thyroid issue, if they know they have thyroid issue, but still they may be on medication, but they're not really better with it. I know my mother-in-law, who has had her thyroid half removed, has gone through such a hard time in the last couple of months. I did not recognize the woman, even her mood or her mindset. She's the most positive person on the planet usually, and she was down and just so it has so much impact. And I think a lot of people are on medication thinking, well, this is as good at it as it's going to get. So give us 3, 4, 5 hacks of what you see the most and how people can address those things.
Well, I think I'll give you the last one first, and then I'll start back at the top. So the last one's going to be exactly what we just said, is in some way or form through your doctor supervision. One of the things you want to be able to try to do is get off of that medication, if at best. Because here's what happens: that's a synthetic drug, and the body's utilizing it in a way that it doesn't. It's sitting in. You gave it a key. It's a false key. It's a plastic key. It's not a real metal key. And so at some point in time, that key doesn't work or it breaks, and then you got to get another key. And that's when you go from 0.5 milligrams to 0.75 milligrams to 100 milligrams. You just keep working yourself up in the milligrams because you keep breaking the keys. And it becomes a problem in the sense of how the body's adapted. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It's just trying to help support the problem along the way. So one of the hacks is in the outcome of doing all the work, which I'm going to give you a few really good tips, is that inside of that is the outcome is to try to get yourself out of that. Because also number two is if you give the body something it needs to make itself and produce, the body's brilliant at being very proficient in its time, energy, and resources. And the second you give it something else all the time, it gets really stupid at making it because it doesn't have to. And so what happens is now, in essence, you're actually hurting the problem, not helping the problem. And so that's just that side of the note. So we'll call that number 4 or 5. Number 1 would be one of my favorite things to do with thyroid patients is put them on a fast. I think a water fast or even a bone broth fast, or some people can handle whey. We put them on whey. Any kind of fast in which you're going to be able to do and stop and regulate the body, because reality is that when you're that inflamed, you're a 5-alarm fire. The body is in full motion, and doing it partially gets the fire to come down, but the coals are still hot. There's still stuff on fire that you can't see, and you need to shut it down. You need to reboot the whole thing and make it happen. And usually like a 5-day to 7-day, depending on what goes on, is what I always start patients with, is because they need that reset. And the only way to shift that whole thing is to kind of get the body to come way down and shut it down. So that's one of my top hacks right there.
Do you get kind of playing devil's advocate, that patient probably are going to say, oh my God, isn't that dangerous? My blood sugar is already up and down and all around, or some people might even be on metformin or drugs to regulate their blood sugar. How do you handle that?
Again, it's a case-to-case basis, and that's why it's called doctoring, you know what I mean? And you just got to monitor your patient through what goes on. And I mean, there's exceptions to the rules, and there's guidelines and helps and ways to kind of support them in the fasting process so that they don't get the blood sugar up and down. But what's crazy about it is that inside of that, that's exactly why they have diabetes.
I know.
It's exactly why they're in that boat is it because they need the reset. So if you have diabetes or that kind of thing, again, under supervision and making sure you're doing it smart, right? I'm not a reckless doctor, but a smart doctor. You got to be smart about what you're doing. And so when you're doing that, you just make sure you handle and support your patient. And it's great though, when they come out the other side, it is like Lucky Charms. It's like there's a pot of gold and there's little leprechauns everywhere. It's like, it's awesome, but you got to get there. It's really hard. I had a female couple just did it, and they called me every day. Can I eat this? No, it's called a fast. Like day 4. Can I just do this? No, it's called a fast. Day 5 came, right? They were like, it's the last day. I'm like, yes, it's called a fast. You're almost done, right? And they called me day 6. They're like, that was very difficult. I'm like, it's not easy. They're like, but you were right. There's leprechauns and rainbows and pot of gold together, right? Because we really came through it, and it is completely changed the way we feel. And I'm like, yeah, but if you didn't do that hard work and you didn't have the accountability, you probably would have quit. She's like, oh, I would have quit. If we didn't get the chance to talk to you, we would have quit.
Yeah. And it's such a mindset point of view, because we're so used to have food available to us. And I know I've done a 5-day fast, and it's just, you would have told me 10, 20 years ago when I competed in natural bodybuilding that I was going to fast for 5 days. I would have said, are you out of your freaking mind? I needed food, or I thought I needed food all the time, but you do train your body. So I think the patient has to understand the why, and necessity, sometime will make people go, okay, I can do this. And it's amazing, like you said, what we can achieve on the other side. So great.
Yeah. Number 2 hack would be, I think it's overlooked and underestimated the power of food, and the type and combination of food you put in. There is this thing called GMO, and it's real. For those of you who don't think it is, I promise you it is. There are tons of chemicals in the foods that we eat today, and you have to be careful. So finding an organic-based food source, to me, is one of the top things you can do. There's tons of farmers markets now. Local growing in any area of the country is getting more and more popular, and it's getting more and more into homes. So I think it's awesome. But finding a diet in the sense of something like after a fast of like paleo or keto style, something or paleo autoimmune, depending on how inflamed you are. These are kind of some really great, like, outlines. I hate the word diet, but outlines in which that you're able to follow. I give the word diet and people instantly think restriction, and they don't understand that when I say diet, it means, oh, no, you could do as much as you want. You got to think it's perspective. I could eat as much as I want over here. I just need to avoid these particular things. And so if I could avoid these things and do all these things, food choices are endless. And in the analogy I use for them, I like analogies if you haven't figured it out. The analogies I use for them is that when you have a puppy, sorry for the background noise, when you have a puppy and he's chewing on your shoe, right? You go over, take the shoe away, and then you give him a bone. Well, if you keep doing that, the puppy eventually learns that the shoe is bad and the bone is good. Well, we're the same thing with food. We're exactly the same thing. I'm taking away the Pop-Tart and I'm giving you, whatever. I'm giving you an organic bar. I'm giving something that's good. And what happens is once you start adopting that and just constantly do that, your neurons go, no good, good. And then you become accustomed to just eating this and the bone becomes your normal. But that understanding takes time, energy, and training and effort on the patient's part as well. Because I can't live with them. I can't walk in their house with them. I can't hold their hand to the grocery store. It just takes a little time and energy and want to help themselves.
You're reminding me of the segment I'm going to do this afternoon, that neurons that fire together, wired together to change those patterns. And my book is all about habits because, well, not all about habits, but the integration of those habits. So whatever or however we can trick ourselves to do those positive changes, then we gain momentum and we're wiring those neurons to create new pathways. So that's key. So Joe, last hack that you would give us.
This one's a little off and it's going to be not for everyone, but this is the craziest one. If you've had a long-standing thyroid problem, and you're that, particularly women, all right, and you're that woman that has to exercise twice a day or once a day for 2 hours, the hack is stop.
Yeah.
It's like, stop doing, it's funny. Exercise, although is awesome, in your state, it's a stress. And what are we trying to avoid? More stress. So every time you exercise, you're creating bombardment of hormones, and it's actually, you get an euphoric feeling, because I hear that from every single woman, especially, is that they get this euphoric feeling like, oh no, I need it. I have to have it. It's time away from my kids. It's just my time. And I get it, but it's also causing havoc on the hormone cascade downstream. And in order to get you right, we got to pull back the reins a little bit, slow the horse down so we can move forward. And that is probably one of the top rubs I get in that world, is because I'm like, this has probably helped lead you down the wrong path a little bit. Although I love exercise, I'm all in. I want you to do it, just not at this space, time, and realm or level of what you're doing it.
Yeah, I know myself. I often say to people, just go for walks. I'm not saying don't get out. Maybe gentle yoga, just at least so they feel like they're not stopping everything. So you again, on a case by case, you have to go with the person. So perfect. Thank you so much, Joe, for your wisdom. So how can people learn more about you? And I realize you're in the States and there's people watching from everywhere, but how can people get in touch with you and potentially work with you if they hear this and they say, oh my goodness, I need to dig deeper with this?
Well, we're in the process of launching that site right now. We're literally like on the doorstep. It's been a 3-year process, but it's naturalthyroid.health is the site. I am also on Facebook. Joe Clarino is my one, or Dr. Joe Clarino. I have 2 sites set up. So that's Joe, last name Clarino. And any message me through there, I can get through you directly, and we can make some contact and see what we can do for you.
Perfect. So I always like to end the segment on and I'm putting you on the spot because I'm not even sure I told you I was going to ask you that. What is your favorite quote, Joe? The quote that you see and you just go, man, I never get tired of seeing this.
And if I can give 30 seconds of a story behind it, is
please.
So I became very good friends with a pastor of mine in my church, and we were in a small group for years. And he told me this story, and it resonated with me in a way that I never thought a story would ever hold to me. which leads me to the quote. He was from a early boy, he knew he was going to be a pastor. And he went to seminary school, got done with seminary school, went to his home church, became there, doubled the church in a couple of years, was a phenom in the church world, had a calling, came to Georgia, opened up his church, and he sat there for almost 4 years, not a lot of practitioner, help me out here. Parish, yes. I couldn't get the word out. And so what happened was he struggled, almost went bankrupt a few times, went back and forth to the church. Church kept giving him money, said, keep going. And after 4 years, he went back and he handed his senior pastor, who he's grown up with, he handed him back the keys and he said, this isn't for me, this isn't my calling. And he said, I'm sorry I let you down, but I'm giving you the keys back, I'm out. And the pastor handed the keys back to him and he said, if you've lost your faith, you can borrow mine. And I think people that are sick and don't know the next step and are paralyzed by this process, if you've lost your way, if you lost your faith, borrow ours. You know what I mean? Borrow ours, or borrow someone who's been through it and who's come out the other side. Because I promise you, if you just find the right person, they'll find the right answer and get you on the right journey if you want to be there.
Yeah, the right answer. And I find that people that have gone through any health challenges are usually so willing to help and support, in our community. And there are a lot of great health practitioners out there to help us do that. So thank you so much. I love your quote. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this week's episode of the What the Heck podcast. I'm always excited to interview new guests, and I love the discussions that we're having. I love learning from my guests, and I will see you on the next podcast where we will keep on our wellness journey, as I believe that all of us are growing on a daily basis with the steps that we take, the knowledge that we gather, and the actions that we take. So have a great week, everyone.
Thank you so much.
I'm Dr. Nathalie Beauchamp, and this is What the Heck, the podcast that dives into what the heck is going on in the world of health and well-being, explores how to optimize your mindset and your lifestyle, and shares practical tools so that you can achieve your fullest potential. Join me and a special guest each week as we discuss everything from biohacking to diet personalization to cutting-edge detox methods to setting and staying accountable to your goals. Ready to find out what the heck you can do to stay healthy, sharp, and at the top of your game? Let's get started. This has been a Wellness on the Go production.